Hey guys, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Today we will be building a full stack application using TypeScript, ExpressJS for the backend, and then we will be using ReactJS, TypeScript, Redux Toolkit and Redux Toolkit Query. And also for the nice design and components, we will be using React Bootstrap. So this is a big application, it's a long tutorial. I hope you will be learning a lot. Let me show you the application that we will be building. That is this one here. We can mark it to do whenever it's done. And it stays marked because it's saved to the database. We also can unmark it again like this. And we can delete a to do, of course, and we can create a to do like this. And also we can edit a to do. This is what we will be implementing. And without further ado, I would say let's get started, let's rock, let's stomp this application out of the ground. Okay, let's jump into coding. I prepared a simple ExpressJS boilerplate app for you. You can use it if you want. It's nothing special. We have an import here of ExpressJS. And then we start the server and print out something to the console. So nothing special, you can use it. Just copy this link here. Next we can use Windows command prompt. And we can do a cd into a folder where we want to have our project. I have a projects folder here. And I can do git clone and paste in the link. And then I also can give it a name. I command backend YouTube and hit enter. Then we can cd into the directory where we have cloned the boilerplate code. So cd backend YouTube. This is what it is called for me. Hit enter. And then we do code, empty space and point. This will open up Visual Studio Code and bring us to the right directory already. I just paste them in. You can stop the video and just write them down. So these are a few more dependencies we need. And then also we need some dev dependencies. And we need these three here. And then we can do npm install. This will install all the dependencies. This will run this command and start the server. Hit enter. We see that our server is running on port 4000. It is this default value here, but we can make use of our environment variable where we specified a port. In order to get access to this environment variable, we can use a package called .env. We can import it like this, and then we can say .env.config. And now we are starting the server and we are using a different port here because it takes in the value from the environment variable. We need also to set up a few other things so that we don't run into errors later. We can do it now. We also have to bring in another package called course, and this is just so that our front end and back end can communicate. If we don't use this package, we will get an error. So we need to use it here. And we can simply use it by running app.use and then course and parentheses. All right. Also, we want our backend to be able to parse JSON. So we need to configure something else. We just need to write app.use. And then we need to say express.json and parentheses. That's basically it for our index.ts file. Next, we can start creating our folders. We can start creating a folder called models where we will have our to-do.ts file representing our to-do model. We will create an interface called iToDo for interface to do, and this will have a description which is a string, and then it will also have to do status which is a boolean. And why we will be using these this interface you will see in a bit. So don't worry. Next, we need to create another interface called to-do doc, which extends mongoose.document. And this interface will have these two properties as well, but it also will have some other properties, which it will get by extending this mongoose.document. So there will be a lot of stuff here that this interface will, well, inherit, you could say, yeah, because it is extending it. It will get all these these types and stuff like this. So yeah, and why we are doing it, you will see it in a bit. Next, let's create another interface called to-do model, which extends mongoose.model. And this will just have a function called build, a function signature, I should say, because this function is not fully implemented. It's just the header, the function header, you could say. And this will have arguments of type I2do. And then it will return, a to-do doc. So we are saying our model here needs to have a function called build, and it needs to receive arguments that satisfy the I2do interface, which is this thing here. So we need to pass in a description and a to-do status, otherwise we would get an error. And then this thing here returns or will return a to-do doc, which is this thing here, which will have a description, a to-do status, but it will also have an ID. And this ID is important because this ID helps us, so we can, for example, edit a to-do, delete a to-do, or fetch a specific to-do. Things like this we can do with it. And here we get an error now because we need to specify something here, at least one type. If we do control and then left mouse button, we see that the model takes in a type of T, and then down below, by default, doc type is equal to this parameter of T. So we can specify our doc type here, which we have here. So we can do angle brackets and paste it in here. So now our I2do model, which extends this thing here, is specific for our to-do doc. Yeah. So it knows it needs to have these two properties. And on top of this, our model also needs to have a function called build, which takes in attributes that are of type I2do. So we need to provide an object which has a description and a to-do status property. And then also this build function must return something of type to-do doc. Next, we start to create our to-do schema, which is equal to new mongoose schema, round brackets, curly brackets, to-do status, colon, curly brackets, type is boolean, required is true. Then we will have another field in the database called description, colon, curly brackets, which is a string, and which is also required. And at the top we can say export const to do is equal to mongoose model, and then we give it a name of to do, comma, and we have to provide our schema, to do schema. Next, we just want to implement this build method here. It will be a static method, so we can do to do schema dot statics, and then we give it a name of build, and it needs to receive arguments of type I2do, and then it needs to return a new to do. and we pass in the attributes. So this is a function that helps us to build a to-do. That's basically what this function is doing. And now the thing is, since it is a static method, we should be able to call it like this. But you see, we don't get any autocompletion here. We are using TypeScript, so we want autocompletion. And we can achieve this. Let's say, angle brackets, we pass in nothing. And as second argument, we pass in to-do model. Let's see what happens now. I do to-do dot. And now, there we go, I get autocompletion. And we see this thing needs to get arguments of type to-do, and it will return a to-do doc. Pretty cool. And now let's try new to-do dot description, for example. All right, this is also working. Can also try to-do status. Seems to work also. So autocompletion is working. We could also specify here our to-do doc. I think here we can pass in our to-do doc as type as well. But this doesn't give us any further benefits, I think. But yeah, if we go Control, left mouse button, we see it takes in two types. One is for specifying the schema, and then the other one is the return type. Now let's start to create another folder in our source folder called controllers, and create a file called to-do controller.ts. It will have an interface called ID, which has a property of type object ID. And then let's create our first request handler called create, which is an async function. Async. And it takes in a request and a response object. And because we are in TypeScript, we can specify request and response here, which are both from Express, the types. Since this handler will be called when we do a post request, we will have a request body, which will have data in it. And we can use this data to create a to-do. So at the moment, we do not get any autocompletion here. And we have no clue what's inside this body, right? And since we are using TypeScript, we can achieve this. So we can type our request even stronger. If we hover over it, we see it's a generic type. And we can pass in other types. The first being a params dictionary. So what we can do here is we can do angle brackets and then do curly braces, because we do not have any params. We only have a body. Then we do not have a response body, so we can provide curly braces as well. And the third parameter is our request body, right? It's a bit annoying. You see it here. Our third parameter here is a request body. And we can type this thing by saying it should be of to do. And of course, I need to export this interface so I can use it there. Now I can import it here. There you go. And now TypeScript knows, this here is wrong. And this needs to be to do status and to description. We can also type the response even further. We want to return to-do doc, right? We want to return this thing here, which has these two properties, but also an ID, for example. So we can just provide angle brackets here and pass in our to-do doc, which we also need to export from here. Next, we can create our new to-do by saying const new to-do is equal to to-do.build round brackets, curly brackets, and then to-do status and description. Of course, we need to import our to-do here, and we can do new to-do dot save. Here we can say now return res.status 201 because we created a new object here. That's a standard code for it, 201. And then JSON, and we can provide, for example, and now we can return a response. Return res.status 201 because we created a new object, and we do JSON and we say success. And yeah, actually we cannot do this here because we specified the response must return to-do doc or something of to-do doc. So we must return this thing here. So this is more safe here, you know. So we know we have a create function and we want to return something new here, the newly created object. Next, we create another request handler called delete to-do. All right, since we want to delete a to-do, we will have the ID in the URL. And whenever we want to access an ID in the URL, we have request params. And we can access these request params by saying request.params. Now we have no plan what's in the request params. So again, we can type it. And here we can use the first argument for this. We can paste in something here and we say this should have something of type ID, which is this thing here. And then the rest is the same. Now we see again TypeScript knows, this is wrong. This must be an ID. Now we can say const to do to delete is equal to await to find by ID and delete. We paste in the ID. And of course, in Mongoose, we always have the IDs with underscore here. As you can see here, they always have the underscore here. So we need to write it like this, underscore ID, colon, and then provide the value, which we get from this variable here. And yeah, we can also catch an error if there's something, and then we can return a response of status 400, for example, and nothing in it. No JSON response, for example. And if there's no error, we just can return res.status 200 and empty JSON response. And I think we do not need to save this in a variable, the result of this deletion. So we can just delete it like this. All right, cool. And of course, I made a mistake here. We do not need to specify anything here. It's not so important here because we do not return anything important. Next, we can create an interface called error, for example. And we can say it should have a property called error, which is a string. Then we can create another function called update to do, which is also an async function. We can paste in this here. Since we want to update as specific to do. We also need to have an ID, so we can find this specific to do. And it will be also provided in the URL. So we can do something like this again, const and then rect.params. And here again, we can use this first, we can pass in the ID type here. So TypeScript knows this needs to be an ID. And the third type we can provide is I2Do for the request body. So we need to send a description and the to-do status. Next, we can say if we have no ID, we can return res.status 400 JSON curly braces error. Please provide a to-do ID. If we have a to-do ID, we can do const again, curly braces, then rect.body. And now TypeScript knows this body will have a to-do status and a description. Now we can try to update the to-do. We can use a try and catch block. And here we say const updated to-do is equal to await to-do dot find by ID. And now we have to provide in curly brackets the ID for the to-do we want to update. So we can pass in our ID here. Also, we need to provide some data that we want to update. So this will be our to-do status and our description. And we will type new is true. And new is equal to true. What it will be doing is it will, this query here will return the newly updated to-do. This contains now the newly updated to-do. And we see it also has something like this. I think we can make it a bit cleaner by providing angle brackets here and type in to-do doc. So now we get a to-do doc back. Then also, if there's an error, for example, a cast error, e.name is equal to cast error, then we can say return res.json, res.status 400.json error, please provide a valid ID. And of course, I made a mistake here. Here we just have an error in round parentheses, and down below we can say if e.name is equal to cast error. Next, let's say export const get to do. We want to be able to get a to do by ID. This will be an async function as well. Request response. We just can copy it. Here we also will have const curly brackets is equal to rect.params. And of course, in our try block, I also need to save the updated to do. I'm not sure whether this method here will save it to the database. I'm not sure, so we can say await, or we do not need to await this. Updated to do dot save, we can say. We have to await it. And of course, this needs to be called updated. Yeah, whenever you remove this and you see this is a promise. And then finally, we can say return res status 200.json and updated to do. Here again, we can specify it in our response type to do doc like this. But here you see we get an error now because we are not always returning a to do doc, but we are also returning an error sometimes, right? So we can say this is either a to do doc or something of type error, which is this thing here. Error property and then a string. Next, we create something called get all to-dos, which is also an async function. We pass in this, and here we just say the response will be an array of objects of type to-do-doc. So we can do something like this just. And here in the request, we do not need to specify anything. We just say const to-dos await to-do.find, which will find all to-dos. And again here, we can maybe specify it like this, but we don't have to. And we can return rest.status 200.json to do, of course, to-dos. Next, export const get to-do. We want to get a single to-do by ID. It is also an async function which receives a request and response. And here we say again const curly brackets ID is equal to rect.parents. Here again, as first type, we can specify ID. And yeah, we want to return a to-do doc, that's right. And const to-do is equal to await to-do dot find one. And then to-do doc, we can specify again. Then we pass an object, curly brackets, underscore ID, and then the value ID. And then we can return res.status 200.json, and we pass in the to-do. And here we just can say export const connect to db equal to an arrow function, and then we say mongoose dot connect process.env, and then mongo URI, and we can pass in a second argument, a callback, where we print out something like this. And the Mongo URI, we need to create an entry in our environment variable here. And the URI looks like this. Next, we can come back to our index.ts and say connect to database. So we import this function and run it here in our app.listen callback. All right, we get a crash. Of course, we need to provide curly brackets because we have 2 lines now in an arrow function, and it's working again. Nice. Next, we need to create another folder called routes. In this folder, we create a file called todos.ps, and I just paste this in here because I don't want to write it. We import all our request handler from our controller. Then we create a router here, and then we just have use the router object with get, post, delete, and put. Since we are creating a RESTful API here, this is all about these HTTP methods here: get, post, delete, and put. So whenever we create something, we use a post. Whenever we want to get data, we use a get request. Whenever we delete something, we use a delete method. And if we want to update something, we use the put method here. And then we export router as to-do routes. So in our index, we can say app.use to-do routes. And that should be it. Now let's try Postman. Okay, I already tested our REST API. As you can see here, I can get a list of the to-dos. Each to-do has an ID, to-do status, description, and something like this, which we don't need. I can also create a to-do by using post. And then I can type in something here, hit enter, and to-do was created, 201. And we get the newly created to-do back. Okay, this is already working nicely. So our REST API is done. I just recognized I made a mistake. This is why our backend didn't work at the end. So please make sure that you go to your .env file and check whether you made something like this here. This is really bad. This is why it did not work. So you have to throw out one of these. And also I didn't test the REST API any further on screen, but of course you should test it if everything works, right? We only tested the get and post functionality, but we didn't test the delete and update functionality. And also if we just wanted to get one to do, we also didn't test this, but I tested it off screen and everything worked perfectly. But I hope you did, because you should never trust somebody telling you it will work. Yeah, usually it doesn't work then. So testing yourself is always, yeah, really helpful and important. Yeah. But now I would say, without any further talking, let's get to the front end using ReactJS, React Bootstrap, Redux Toolkit Query, and Redux Toolkit, yeah, to build a nice front end for our REST API. And yeah, let's see it come all together, and yeah, let's go. Alrighty, let's scaffold our ReactJS application using Vite. You can come to this page here and copy this link here. And then I paste it in here. Don't forget to change this here, this name. I will call mine to-do list React TypeScript, for example, or whatsoever. Hit enter. And it's already installed. Let's cd into the folder of our project. Yep, hit npm install. And then we can do code, empty space, and point. Hit enter. This will bring Visual Studio Code up, and we are already in the right directory. And we can do npm run dev. And here is our running ReactJS application. Let's make a little cleanup. We do not need app.css. We do not need index.css. And we do not need these two imports in main.tsx. We do not need logo.svg. And we do not need to import these two in app.tsx. And of course, we do not need to have this in our JSX here. We just can delete it, but leave the outer div. That's okay. All right. And of course, I deleted app. We still need it. Beautiful. Now we have an empty ReactJS application and we can start working. Next, let's install our dependencies. We need quite a few, so bear with me. What I will do, I will copy all the dependencies we need and paste them in. You can stop the video and write them down yourself, or you can go to my GitHub and and copy them from there, because it's a lot of work. And yeah, you don't need to exactly install these versions, but if you don't do it, it can happen that you run into some strange errors. Yeah, that's a little risky. All right, next we can open another terminal window here and we do npm install again. so that all these packages are installed. Next, we can set up our store for Redux Toolkit. So in our source folder, we make another folder called Redux. And in this folder, we create a file called store.ts. And here we can import something from Redux Toolkit. And this will be configure store. Then we can create our store. Export const store is equal to configure store. And we have to provide a reducer property, which is at the moment empty because we don't have any reducer. And also, this is best practice. We can specify two types here that we will be using for our hooks. This is from the Redux Toolkit page. It's recommended. We can create a root type, or maybe we call it root state, maybe better. And this is equal to the return type of a function, type of store get state. So the root state will be basically whatever in the store here. And you will maybe see it later how it looks when I hover over it. At the moment we don't have anything in it. And also we need to create a second type here, which we call app dispatch, which is equal to type of store dispatch. That's it for now. Let's create another folder in the Redux folder called features. And in it, we will create a file called model slice.ts. And it's best practice to call this features and then always to have slices of features. All right, let's start with our modal slice. First of all, we want to define our modal state. So we say export an interface called modal state. And this is an object with a to-do ID to fetch for modal, which is of type string. This is just an ID here. This ID will be needed by our modal so that our modal can always fetch the exact to-do if we want to edit a to-do. Because if we want to edit a to-do and we click on the to-do button, we want the modal to open and fetch the right to-do so that the input field is already pre-populated. This is what we want to achieve, but you will understand it a bit later when we will implement this functionality, so don't worry. And we also will have a modal status, which is a boolean. And this modal status allows us to toggle the modal, to show the modal and to hide it again. You will also see this in action soon. Let's also create another interface called modal status. And this also has a property called modal status, which is a boolean. I still have it in my recordings. I'm not sure, we might not need one of these. So we will see it soon, but it's not so important right now. Just bear with me. Next, we also need an interface called hasID, or by the way, we don't need that one. Okay. Then we can create the initial state, const initial state, which is of modal state. And this just describes the default state when the app starts and nothing has happened. So what data we want to have in our state, in our global state. Because that's what we are using Redux for. We are having a global store, a global state, and all components can access this global state from everywhere. It doesn't matter which component, and the component can change the global state, and it can also get data from the global state. But we will see it in action soon. All right, so let's work on our initial state. So this thing here will be an empty string by default. And of course, our modal status will be false. We do not want to see it if we didn't click and stuff like this. Next, we can create our modal slice. Create slice, there it is. We can give it a name of modal. We pass in the initial state. And here we define our reducers. And reducers are basically functions here that can alter the state here in this slice. And you also will see how this works now. We will create a function called toggle modal, and this function receives the state as argument and the action. And the action is of type payload action, and we also can specify a type for the payload, which is P here. So by default it's void, but we wanna give it a payload. So the payload will be the modal status, yeah? Whether it is true or false. So we can pass in angle brackets modal status. There we go. And now we can change the state dependent on the payload in our action. We can say state.modal status and see, due to TypeScript, we get everywhere nice auto-completion because we provided types everywhere. And we can do is equal to action.payload.modal status. So our action needs to have a payload of an object containing the modal status, which has to be a boolean. Okay, so far so good. Now we can export const toggle modal. We can export this thing here by saying is equal to modal slice dot reducers dot actions, sorry. And also we can export our reducer by saying export default modal slice dot reducer. Now we can go back to our store and import our reducer here. So because we did export default here, we can say import to do reducer, and we don't have to use these curly brackets here, from features modal slice, and we can paste it in here. And now if we hover over root state, we see it has already a type of the to-do reducer, which has the type of modal state. And if we hover over it, we see we have a to-do reducer with the state of modal state. Maybe we can do something different here. We can say just to do and then put in our to-do reducer. And now we can import it here, modal reducer from features modal slice. And we can say here reducer, and we just say modal colon reduce modal reducer. If we hover over our root state now, we see we have a modal in it which is mapped to a modal state. And here we see also something. We can basically dispatch action to change our modal state. Yeah, we are using these functions here to change the state of our modal slice. This is what it's all about. Alrighty, next we have to go to our main.tsx and we have to wrap our complete app with a provider, which gets a store property prop, and we have to pass in our store like this. Let's look if we get any errors. There is an error, but I refresh. Maybe that's something. Yeah, that was an old error. I think everything is fine now. Let's keep grinding. Okay, now I would say let's create our components. So we create a new folder in our source folder called components. And we will create one component to do app row.tsx, and I do RFC and hit enter. This is possible because I have an extension called React Snippets. You can install it, restart Visual Studio Code, and then it should work. Now we can import to-do into main. Now we can import to-do app into our app.tsx, and we should see our component here. Nice. This is already working. Next, I forgot something, because we need some CSS to make our front end look beautiful. So we can use a link from React Bootstrap that will provide CSS for us. And it's somewhere here. You can take this link, paste it in index.html, maybe somewhere here. Now we can go back to our to-do app, and we can wrap this thing in a container, which is a React Bootstrap component. Okay, next we will be creating our modal. All right, next I would say we create our modal. I call it app modal because otherwise we will get some confusion with Bootstrap components. So app modal.tsx, RFC, there we go. And we can import it here. There we go. And let's get us a nice modal from React Bootstrap. And we can take this one here. This is beautiful. We can take all of this, I think. We can take all of this. Just change the name again. Modal. We have to export it. And we see our modal here already. Looking nice. For now, that's okay. Let's work on our next component called to-do list.tsx, which will be a table. Yeah, maybe we are taking this one here. We paste it in, call this to-do list, and we export it here. Now we can import it into our to-do app, and we should see a nice table. Yay! Not too bad. The next thing we can do is we only need one row because we will be using the map function from JavaScript or from TypeScript, and we can loop over one array, and for each to-do we can render this thing here, right? So we only need one table row. And next we can take this thing here out and create another component. So by the way, I hit Control and X, and now we create another component called row.tsx, and this will be basically just one row here. And I do RFC and paste this in here. Now I go back to to-do list, and I can import it a row like this, and there's the same output. Next, let's work on our services. So we will be able to fetch data and also to mutate data on the server. For this, we will be creating a folder called services, and in it we will have a file called produce.ts. Let's start to create an interface, and this interface will have two properties: description, which is a string, and a to-do status, which is Boolean. This represents basically the data or the properties our object must have that we pass in, when we want to create a to-do. And important here, you see we do not have an ID here. So this is why we call it create, because when we create a to-do, we do not have an ID. We have only an ID if it comes from the database. Then we have an ID, and then we can delete it or update it, for example. But if we do not have any ID, we only can create a to-do or get all to-dos, but not a specific to-do. All right, let's keep grinding. Next, we create another interface, to do I call it here, which extends to do create. So this thing here, to do I, has both of these properties, but it also has an ID, which is a string. And I have an error here because I have used wrong brackets. Okay. And also let's create an enum, which I call method. And in this enum we have get is equal to get, post is equal to post, delete is equal to delete, and put is equal to put. And why I do this, I will explain later, but this is a very cool feature of TypeScript. It helps us so we don't make any mistakes, because later in the code we have to use these strings here, and we could easily mess up one string and then we would get an error, and it would be maybe hard to figure out where the error comes from. And this is especially true for JavaScript, yeah, where you can easily make errors as such. So this is why I'm using an enum here, and you will see when it comes handy. Yeah? You will see it later. Now let's create our API. This is how you usually name it when using Redux Toolkit Query. We say to do API is equal to create API, which I have to import create API from add Redux, then query, and then React. All right, round parentheses, curly brackets. And now we have to provide a reducer path. We just call it to do API, same as here above. Then we have to provide a base query, which is a function, fetch base query. And this function needs to get an object, base URL, which is in our case http:// of course const is missing here, /localhost. And now I have to look up my port again, I forgot it. Okay, it should be 334. Next we have to provide so-called tag types, and what these are I will explain in a bit. I call them to do, and then comma, we have to go to our endpoints, and this endpoints is a property which is a arrow function which receives an argument called builder, and this builder will build the URLs for us, you could say. So let's start creating some queries. Get to do's, builder.query, and then we have to provide an object again as argument, and we can say query, which is a function which returns our query, which is in our case just to do's. And this query builder will take this thing here and append to do's. So it will construct our URL, you could say. And this thing here is of type any. This is not correct. And of course, this is because I made a mistake here. And now this should not be of type any, right? It's an endpoint builder. Let's keep going. And now we can do something here, provides tags, and we can say it's an array of to-do. So what this basically means, we have a query, get all to-dos, and it just provides to-dos. And what this means and why we have to write it here, you will see it in a bit. Stay with me. Now let's keep going. Let's create another. Next, this was a query because we just get data. We don't change the data on the server. Now let's create a mutation. Create to do. And we say builder.mutation, and we have to provide a query which gets the to do. yeah, which gets some data. And now we can open curly braces and can say return URL. We can say just to-dos. That's all right. Then we can provide a method. And now our enum, oops, and here's a mistake. And now our enum comes handy. We can say method, and we get nice auto-completion here. And we can choose post. This is really helpful because imagine you make a typo here, you provide a string here. That's not really good. So this is why we use an enum here for more type safety. And also we have a body, right? The data for our to-do that we want to create. So we have a body here, a request body, and we have to pass in our to-do. And then we have something here called invalidate tags. And let's put in the same. This is important. It has to be the same. This has all to be the same. And now let me explain to you what's happening. Every time we do queries, we have to do this, provides tags. Every time we change the state of the server by using a mutation, we have to invalidate the tags. What does this mean? It basically means, imagine you have a list of to-dos and then you create a new to-do. And what do you want to happen now after you have created a to-do? You want the to-do to immediately appear in the table, right? You want to immediately see it. And this is where invalidates tags comes in handy, because it automatically fetches the new to-dos. It fetches the new to-dos from the server, so it gets also your new to-do, and you can see it in your front end. And this is basically the magic of provide tags and invalidate tags. They need always to be the same. All right, enough talking. Let's keep going. Let's create another mutation called update to do. We say builder.mutation. And again, we have a query here that gets a to do. And then we can say return a URL. And of course, to-dos again. What else? But then, since we want to update a specific to-do, we have to provide an ID in the URL. This is best practice. So let's do it. To-do dot underscore ID. Method will be put. And in the body, we have our old to-do that we want to update. And since we are changing the state on the server, we have to provide this tag here that we get the updated to-do. That all to-dos are refetched and we get our new to-do, that we see it straight on the screen. All right. Now we have to implement a last query, get to-do by ID. And we say builder.query, and we say our query takes in a to-do ID. Why now? Because we want to show a specific to-do. We don't want to fetch all to-dos, we only want to fetch one to-do. And why we only want to fetch one to-do has the following reason. We want to be able to display the to-do that we want to edit in a model. So basically, we have to fetch a specific to-do that the model can display it. But you will see it soon, so don't worry, stay with me. All right, and we say we return our URL here. We say to-dos, and then again we have to pass in our to-do ID. And we are using a template string here because then we easily can pass in a variable here. And it also provides text because it's a query. There we go. And that's it for our to-do services. Next, I would say let's provide some types for this to make it strongly typed. All right, let's start with our get to dos. We can write angle brackets here next to query. And if we hit Control and left mouse button, we can look what the query expects, and you see a result type and a query argument. So we can specify the result, which will be of type to do I and array. It will be an array of to do I, and arguments will be void because we don't have to provide any arguments. Next, let's go to the mutation, create to do. Here we create, the result is a to do I. We create one to do, and the arguments we have to provide are of type to do create. So to do create was this. We have to provide these two things, and we get back a to do I, which also has of course an ID because it comes from the database. Let's keep going. What we have next? We can also update our to do here. Next, we go to update to do. The result will be a to do I, and the arguments will be of to do I as well. Because we already have created a to do, so it has an ID and stuff like this. So they are both equal types here. Okay. Now I have an error here because these tags have to match. So I'd say to-dos here because it's convention to name it in plural, I think. So we call it to-dos, 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 and to-dos. Okay, now let's work on our components. First of all, I close this node models. Let's work on our to-do list. We already have some to-dos in our database. So what we can do is the following now in our to-do list. We can use a hook, which is super cool. It comes with Redux Toolkit Query. We get data here. We can destructure it. We can get the to-dos of it. And we can use a hook from to-do API dot. And then we can say use get to-dos query. And this is a super cool thing. A Redux Toolkit Query creates this hook for us. Yeah, you can see get to-dos. It comes from this get to-dos query. It created this hook for us. And now we can easily fetch all to-dos via this hook, which was created by Redux Toolkit Query automatically. So let's take the to-dos, and what we can do is we can say to-dos. If we have any to-dos, we can map over them, get each to-do, and then we can pass it in here. All right, at the moment it does not work. I got an error here. We said HTTPS, I think I made a mistake in our services. Yes, this has to be called HTTP only, like this. And now let's see what's happening. Let's refresh. All right, this still does not work, and I know why. Let's go back to our store. We have to provide some more properties here in our reducer, I think. In our reducer, let's say whatever to-do API .reducer path is. This is dynamic assignment, I would say, maybe. Yeah. So whatever this is a string, I think. We assign it to do API.reducer. I already showed you in the services that we always had this invalidates tags and provides tags. And if we want to be able to use this, we also have to provide something else here next to the reducer, and this is this thing here. We have to provide these two lines here, otherwise this will not work. And now we see, yay, we are getting printed out the rows. For each entry in the database, we get one row. but we can see, it's not the actual data from the to-do. So let's work on it now. So in order to display the data, the row needs to receive props called to-do, and we do destructuring here so that we don't receive the props, but we receive to-do straight away. Let's provide an interface for our to-do, because otherwise we might be getting a naming conflict. Yeah, I call this row and say the row should be of type to-do I. We can import it here, and now we can specify it here, to-do I. Alright, cool. We get an error here now because we don't pass to-do into our row. So let's do it. We can say row is equal to to-do, because that's what we have access to in our map function. And now we have an error here, and this is because I made a mistake. This needs to be row. Now the error is gone. And now we can actually display some data. We can say display, we can say to-do. Yay, and there we go. We are finally able to display data. Looking good already. Now let's go back to our to-do list. So basically here we can write down, we want to have an ID. Here we want to have the to-do status. And here to-do description. And here we want to have some actions. There we go. Next, we want to have a checkbox here for each row. So we go back to our row. And in the second TD element here, we can use an input. Oops. Close it. Provide a type of checkbox. Set its check property to row.to-do status. Oops, this is it's a mistake. I have to put it in the input tag. Let's also create the buttons here. For this, we go to the last TD element. We can use the button component. We say this will be an edit button. I have to import it from React Bootstrap. And we want to have another button, which is a delete button. And the delete button should be a variant of danger. There we go. Next, we use the stack component from React Bootstrap. We can wrap our buttons with it. Now we see we have something like this. We can say direction is horizontal. And we can provide a gap, which is maybe 2. So we have a little bit space between them. Also, let's go back to our app model. Let's take this button here and let's put it in our to-do list component. Let's also wrap it in a stack. We have to import the stack. And of course, at the moment, we do not have these functions here, so we can delete them. And we have to import the button. Okay, now we have it here. Let's provide some classes to our stack. Class name, let's say deflex align items center. There we go. And let's provide a class name to our button. Let's say mt5. I mean, let's better say m5. Like this. Let's start with the toggle functionality. So we want to click and then basically say the to-do is done. At the moment it does nothing. So let's work on that. We go to our row and our checkbox. Let's say what should happen if the onChange event is triggered. We want to run a function called onToggle. which takes the row. This argument, we can, for this case, we can say const angle brackets or square brackets. That's what they are called. Update to do. And then we can say to do API. Use update to do mutation, right? Again, Redux Toolkit Query builds this automatically. This is super cool. Let's create the onToggle function. And here we will make use of use callback. And we can say we pass in a function to use callback that gets the row as argument of type to do I. And I have to import it. And here we can call update to do, pass in all the properties of the to do, which is just the description by now that we don't want to change. And then the property that we want to change, that is the to do status. And we set it to the opposite of what it is at the moment. We do it via bang operator like this. And we get an error here because we have to provide an array here with dependencies where we can pass in our update to do. We also can see, because we typed it, the argument is of type to do I, and this is what we pass in here. Let's see why we get an error here. Of course, our update to do, we need to pass it. So onToggle always returns the same result, except when update to do changes here. When this function is recreated. All right, and now we can take this onToggle. It's already here at onChange. And now let's try it out and let's see what we get. All right, we can toggle it. Let's refresh. And it stays, yay. It stays because it comes from the database and they have the status of done now, basically. Now we want to be able to create a to-do. Let's work on this functionality now. In our to-do list component, first of all, we can change this text here to create. In order to create a to-do, we first need to be able to see the model. So we need to change the global state. And we do this via use app dispatch, which we have specified in our... Oh, we do not have specified it yet, so let's do it. Let's create a folder called hooks and make a file in it called hooks.ts. And here we export two hooks, export const, use app dispatch, we call it. And we can say this has the type of a function that returns app dispatch. And we set it equal to use dispatch, like this. And we need to import app dispatch. This is also best practice. It comes from the Redux Toolkit page. Next, we can create another hook. Strongly typed hook, I should say. Use app selector, we call it, which is of typed use selector hook. And we pass in the root state. And we say it is equal to use selector from React Redux. Nice. Now in our to-do list, we can say const dispatch is equal to use app dispatch. And we can grab the global state of our model, yeah? Whether it's opened or closed. Remember, in our model slice, we have the model status, which is a boolean. And we can grab it by saying const model status. We can destructure it by saying is equal to use app selector, which gets a function in, and this function has access to the state. And then we can say state dot model, and then we can get from this slice the model status. And we call it model here because in our store we assign the model reducer to model. This is why. Here I get an error. Of course, this is important. Please do not call the function here. Just write it like this. Now that we have our model status, we can toggle it. And we want to show our model, we want to toggle it when we click on the create button. So let's do it. We can say whenever the on-click event on the button is triggered, we want to run a function that returns dispatch, and then we can dispatch an action, and we want to dispatch the toggle modal. Do we have it? Let me see. I go back to the modal slice, toggle modal. We export it here. All right, we should be able to dispatch it. Yeah, there we go. And we pass in the modal status, because that's what it is expecting. Remember, it expects a payload of modal status, which is this thing here. And now we have to provide true or false. And we say it should be the opposite of what it is now. And we have access to modal status because we fetch the state from the global store. If you have the developer tools for React installed for Chrome, you can go to our to-do list component, and then you see we have access to the state from the modal slice, and it's true, and we can toggle it. If I click on it, it's false, it's true again, yeah? So it's working. Now we need to make sure that our modal can also access the modal state, right? Or the modal status whatsoever. So we go to our to-do list app, we copy this thing here, paste it in here, and now I take modal status and put it here instead of show. And let's see it now. Yay! We can toggle our modal, but we cannot close it yet. So let's work on it now. Handle show we do not need. Handle close, we can work on this one now. Handle close, we want also to dispatch an action to change the state of the modal slice. So we say const dispatch is equal to use app dispatch, and then we say dispatch toggle modal, and we pass in modal status and then false. Only false, we don't want to toggle, we always want to make the state false. So the modal closes. Perfect. And you see, because we are using TypeScript, we get auto-completion everywhere. And this helps a lot with making less bugs and making less stupid errors. So this is pretty cool. This is pretty nice feature of TypeScript. Let's keep going. Next, we work on the delete functionality, right? We should do it. For the delete functionality, let's go back to our row, because that's where we have our delete button here, right? And we can say that we want to have a delete to do function. So we say const delete to do in square brackets. It's equal to do API dot delete to do. Okay, here I get now auto completion, and it's because I forgot to implement the delete to do functionality. So yeah, let's work on it. Let's go back to services. And I think I don't have delete to do here, or I do not have. Okay, so let's create one. Delete to do is equal to builder, and this is a mutation, of course, because it changes the state of the server. And we have a query here where we accept the to do ID as argument. Then we return the URL string. We say to do's slash to do ID. And of course, let's wrap it in curly brackets. And then we also have to provide a method, because the default method is get, and we want to do a delete. So we say method colon, and of course we have to return like this, and we have to wrap it again in curly brackets. And now we can say method is delete, and we do not provide a body, yeah, because the ID is enough. in order to delete a to-do. So what's happening here? Sorry, my mistake. These colons are too much here. And of course, this must be the URL. This must be to-do ID. Now we have access to this hook. Use delete mutation. Nice. And we can use it whenever we click on the delete button. So we simply run a function that returns delete to do, and we pass in row.id. Let's test it. Okay. It works, but you see, it does not work straight away. We have to refresh, then it's gone. So there might be something wrong in our services here. I forgot something. Yeah, I found the error, I think. I forgot something. I have to use this thing here. Now let's try again. Yep, it's working. Beautiful. Cool. Next, now that we see our model, let's create an input field here. So we can actually create a to-do. On React Bootstrap, let's look for a form group or something like this, form controls. And let's take the first example here. And instead of this text here, we can paste it in. We have to import form from React Bootstrap. And we should see this. Nice. Let's delete this second part here. We don't need it. Let's change email to enter to do. Type, we can set it to text. Placeholder, we can say to do. Let's work on the create functionality now. As you might know, we can use a function for it again from our to-do API, which creates us really nice, useful hooks, which return functions. So we can say create to-do in square brackets is equal to to-do API dot use create to-do mutation. Oops. Create to-do mutation. And we want to create a to-do when we click on this button here, right? So we take create to-do, go to this button, say on click, curly brackets, then we run a function in it. Oops. Curly brackets. We run a function and we pass create to do in, which needs to get some arguments of type to do create. So we need to pass in a description, and which is the input value. We do not have this variable at the moment, but we will create it soon. And we have to pass in the to-do status, which is always false for a new to-do. This is just how I implemented it. Okay. And then we can take handle close. And then we can delete handle close here and just put it below here. Handle close. After we created a to-do, we want to close the modal. And this is an arrow function. So, and we have 2 lines of code here. So we need to use curly brackets here. And of course, we have to close the tag here of the button. Now let's create a local state in our modal by using the useState hook. We say const input value and set input value. It's equal to useState. So this hook returns a value and a function which can change this value. And we say useState is either of type string or undefined. Let's change the input value whenever the onChange event on the input is triggered. Whenever the onChange event is triggered, we want to run a function called onChange. Let's create this function. const on change. This function receives the event, which is of type React change event dot, and then angle brackets HTML input element. And now we can say set input value to e.target.value. And that's basically the value from this input, whatever we type in here. All right, let's see it in action. We can go to our React Dev Tools. We go to our app model. We see that the state is undefined at the moment. Let's see if something happens when we type. Yep, it changes already. Nice, it's working. Now down below we are getting an error here. It says that this thing is string or undefined, which is not assignable to type of string. Yeah, it has to be type of string and not undefined. So we can make sure that this thing is always a string. And we can do it by saying that the input value should be not undefined. And we do it by input value, and then we can provide two of these here, so that this function is only run when this is trueish. So if it's not empty. Let's see it now. Let's click on the button. And yeah, it's working. Okay, and next let's work on the edit functionality. In order to implement the edit functionality, we have to understand a thing first. And I've implemented the logic in a way that whenever we have an ID, we want to update the to-do. And if we don't have an ID, then we want to create a to-do. And what I mean by this is, let's look into our global state in Redux. We have a state here in our modal, and you see we have a to-do to fetch for modal. This is an empty string by default. And whenever we have provided an ID here, we want to basically do the edit, the update function, right? So let's implement this. So we can say, if we have no to-do ID, then we want to create a to-do. Otherwise, we want to run update to-do and also provide these things here. Oops. But not only these things, also an ID of to-do ID, like this. Let's create update to-do. We already know how it is working, right? Update to-do. To-do API dot update to-do mutation. Now we need to get access to the to-do ID. We need to get it from the global store, right? So we can use app selector here. We can use this thing again. But we can say we want to get the this thing here. To-do ID to fetch for modal. And of course, now I named it differently, but doesn't matter. I copy it and paste it in here and here. And again, it says that the description has to be string, but here it can be string or undefined, because if we do not type something in and we hit save changes, we still would run this function, right? And we do not want to run it because an empty to-do does not make any sense. So what we have to do here is we have to say it has also to have an input value. So we say here input value must be trueish, and then we only want to update. Now this error should go away. Let's see it in action. All right, the edit button still does not work. Let's go to our row to make the edit button work. Whenever we click on the edit button, we want to dispatch two actions. So what we dispatch here is dispatch. Const dispatch is equal to use app dispatch. And now we can dispatch update to do. Let me see what we have in our modal slice. And I forgot something in our reducers section here. We only have toggle modal, but we also need a function to change the value of this property here, right? So let's do that. So let's create another function here, and this thing should have access to the state as well, and it is. And also it should receive an action object, which is of type payload action, and this just should be a string. Or maybe not, it should be of this type here, modal state. Let's do it like this. And let's say state.modal status is equal to action.payload.modal status. Okay, and maybe let's make this payload action of type modal status. Yep, like this. Let's go back here, and now we can dispatch this action. So we do update. Let's also make sure that we export this function here down below. And now we can import this function here and paste in a payload of type modal status. So it expects a property called ID, which is of type string. So we pass in the actual ID like this. And I still get an error here. My bad. This is wrong here. We do not need update to do here. So let's throw it out. And then it should be fine. Okay. And of course, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. The payload action should be of type modal state. Yeah. Let's do it like this. Let's go back here. Now we should get nice auto-completion here, and it should be called to do ID to fetch for modal, and we can pass in row dot underscore ID. And here we need to change not modal status, but to do ID to fetch for modal. And here it is also, and here it is called ID, I think. No, it's also called like this. And now if we go to our Redux dev tools here, we can see that in our global store, we already have an ID here because I clicked. But whenever I click, the ID changes, right? And this is pretty cool. And this is cool now because now whenever we click here and we toggle our modal, it opens and it can get access to the ID from the global state. It can take that ID and fetch the specific to do with that ID. So it can be displayed in the modal. We will see it in action soon. First of all, we need to make sure that in our row, we also dispatch another action. And this is basically this one. I just copy it. And in order to toggle the modal, again, we need to dispatch another action, toggle modal. And in order to change the global state of the modal in the modal slice, we dispatch another action here. So we have to import toggle modal first here. And we do not have access to modal status. So we can get this as well. So let's get this as well. We can go to app modal. There we have it already. Copy it. Go back to our row. We can paste it in. Now we have access to our modal status. Let's refresh. Okay, we have some kind of error here. Of course, we need to import use app selector. Now it's working again. Let's look into our components tag here and see what's in our app model. Now in our app model, we need to get the data. In order to be able to do that, first of all, we can get the ID from global state. I just call it like this. And I say it's equal to use app selector as in the state here. And I'm saying state.model. And then I get the ID. Next, I can do use effect to run a function after the component has been rendered. And here I just say set input value. And I set it to the to-do description. But first of all, we need to get it. We just have the ID here. So I can say const I have to do it like this, data, and get the single to-do. Then to-do API, get to-do by ID. Yep, this is the hook. Here I get an error now because we have to provide an ID here and I didn't put anything in, but we don't get any nice type hints here. So I go back to store to to-dos and we see here that I forgot the typing here, right? So we will get back a to-do I and we have to provide a string. And this string is basically the to-do ID, you could say. And here we can see now that it expects a string as argument. So let's pass that string in, which is the ID from the global state here. And then we can say to-do dot description. And of course, this should be not an object. Now we got the problem because our server crashed. And the crash happened because we didn't provide an ID here. So let's go back to our ExpressJS server and we can just hit Control S. This is for me. Whenever I save a file, the server should restart. Does it restart? Yes. Now everything should be okay again. Let's refresh. And what we can do now, we can run use effect whenever the to-do changes. So we can provide a dependency here and add the to-do. We have one annoying error here in our to-do list. Let's fix it. We need to provide a key. Let's go to our to-do list and then we can provide a key here. Because every time we map over something, we need to provide a key. So we provide the ID here, which is unique. This error is gone now, perfect. And now we can see that in our model, we have already the correct state here. It is there, but it's not displayed here. Let's work on it. We simply have to make our input here a controlled input by providing a value here on the input and say the value should be input value or it should be an empty string like this. And now we get already the old value here and we can also update it. Works perfectly. And we can delete them. Now finally, we are basically done. Let's make a little change to our UI that whenever we select this input here, that the complete row becomes green. Yeah, this is a nice user experience. Let's work on it now. This is basic conditional rendering. It's very easy. We just have to provide some classes. Let's go to our TR element here and we can provide a class like this. So when the to-do status is true, then we want to show this thing here as class name, otherwise this. Let's see what happens. Nice. we already get a green row. The font color is black. This is not so good. What we can do is we can add this line to every TD element, to the description and to the ID, like this. So what it is saying is whenever the to-do status is true, then add text white, so that the text becomes white. And that's basically it, guys. It was a very long tutorial, but I really wanted to make it happen. I'm super tired. I worked the whole night. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a little bit about React, TypeScript, and how to use Redux Toolkit and Redux Toolkit Query to make a nice, awesome app. We also used ExpressJS for the backend. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching and see you in the next video. Have a good day.